Kim Jong-un launches nuclear cruise missile, US warship crosses Taiwan Strait. In 2024, tensions escalated in East Asia as Kim Jong-un not only conducted underwater nuclear weapon tests, but also showcased coastal artillery in the maritime buffer zones. Following this display, he launched intermediate-range, solid-fueled ballistic missiles and concluded with a fireworks show featuring nuclear cruise missiles in the Western Seas. In his statements, Kim Jong-un directly labeled South Korea as the internal enemy and took a tough stance against the United States, firmly stating that North Korea had no intention of avoiding this high-stakes war drama. These statements undoubtedly added oil to the fire on the heightened tensions of this geopolitical stage. Various experts have turned into prophets, warning that peace on the Korean peninsula is teetering on the edge of a cliff, and a full-scale conflict seems like an inevitable climax in the script. The world's eyes are all focused on North Korea, eagerly anticipating the next twist in the plot. The United States, acting as the hidden director behind the scenes, has quietly assembled its 3 aircraft carrier battle groups in the waters around the Korean peninsula, preparing for potential developments. North Korea launches strategic cruise missile. On January 24th, North Korea confirmed the launch of its new Pulwasol 331 cruise missile into the western waters near South Korea, and it's been reported that this missile has the capability to carry a tactical nuclear warhead. This move is undoubtedly seen as a display of deterrence towards the United States and the Western world, essentially signaling that North Korea is willing to engage with US aircraft carriers. Cruise missiles, known for their ability to fly close to the sea surface and evade radar detection, serves as a way for North Korea to assert not only do we have this technology, but we can almost mount nuclear warheads on them. As soon as this news broke, media outlets around the world went into a frenzy. Cruise missiles are considerably more challenging to develop compared to ballistic missiles, requiring higher levels of engineering expertise, more precise engine technology, not to mention the complexity of carrying nuclear warheads. Many are questioning whether North Korea has the capability of this on their own, suspecting that this technology may have come from either China or Russia. The US swiftly assessed the situation, pondering whether North Korea's cruise missiles are genuinely capable. If these missiles can indeed breach the defenses of US aircraft carriers, it would necessitate a pause in US diplomatic and military strategies to reassess their approach. However, if it turns out that the missile's speed and other parameters are insufficient to threaten US anti-aircraft systems, then US actions will proceed as planned. Now, let's examine the US response to the situation. On January 24th, a US missile destroyer transited the Taiwan Strait for the first time in 2024. This move can be interpreted as a response to North Korea's nuclear cruise missile, essentially conveying the message, while your cruise missiles may be impressive, we remain confident in our ability to pass through the Taiwan Strait. The US destroyer operates as if engaged in a sophisticated game of hide and seek, turning off all radar signals and stealthily passing through. Each instance serves as a test of China's detection capabilities, almost as if it's questioning, can you truly locate us using radar and sonar? Now let's take a look at China's response. After the United States announced on the 25th that their destroyer had successfully passed through the Taiwan Strait, China immediately responded, claiming they had been tracking and monitoring the situation the entire time. If the Chinese military had indeed been monitoring the US warship movements the entire time, one might wonder why they didn't speak up earlier. All of this seems to indicate a significant gap in their ability to timely monitor the actions of US naval vessels. Each time the US missiles destroyer quietly crosses the Taiwan Strait, the equipment on board is dedicated to gathering all of the Chinese government's secrets. This is also why the United States is continuously building new missile destroyers and installing new electronic devices. The information we find on Wikipedia only scratches the surface. The truly formidable secret weapon remains hidden behind the scenes. When US warships navigate the Taiwan Strait, they are not just conducting reconnaissance, but also engaging in battlefield cleanup. Chinese naval vessels basically patrol the Taiwan Strait day and night, deploying gadgets such as underwater drones and smart torpedoes. But they face a setback when the US warship traverse the area. Their circuit systems get short-circuited and their equipment sinks directly to the seabed, rendering the Chinese government's earlier efforts completely in vain. Chinese authorities are frustrated but can only watch as the US military harvests in its own backyard. This cat and mouse game comes with more intricate details. If the Chinese torpedoes can maintain noise levels below 90 decibels, they can be considered sonar invisible in the marine environment. But if US destroyers can effectively neutralize these 90 decibel noise torpedoes, then China would have to step up its game and develop even more concealed versions, perhaps at 85 decibels or lower. Once these new torpedoes go unnoticed by the US military, they would likely deploy them on a large scale. Now, looking at Kim Jong-un's nuclear cruise missiles, they seem to be designed specifically to target US aircraft carriers. But if the Chinese Communist Party is unable to detect US naval passage through the Taiwan Strait, it raises questions about the effectiveness of these nuclear cruise missiles and the much-touted Chinese missiles like the Dongfeng 17 and Dongfeng 26. If it were that straightforward, the Chinese Communist Party would have showcased their capabilities on a global stage long ago. Through North Korea, China and Russia are showcasing their strategic cruise missiles as a display of power in the Western world, essentially saying, look at how formidable our toys are. If you can defend against them, we'll consider other strategies. If not, then let's sit down and have a discussion. This serves as a test of the US military's capabilities and responses. If the US military can't effectively counter these threats, US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken would likely need to step in. Putin's demands are not to be taken lightly either. He laid out his conditions before the Ukraine conflict, requiring the US to withdraw from the first island chain, Europe to revert to its 1991 borders, and a prohibition on deploying intermediate-range missiles within 3,000 kilometers of Chinese and Russian territories. Even Trump's statement about resolving the Ukraine issue in 24 hours essentially amounted to compromising Ukraine's interest, shaping public opinion. Meanwhile, the escalating war of words on the Korean peninsula is being carefully staged, the governments and media from various countries crafting their own narratives. The New York Times reporting and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's statement serves as two crucial aspects of this unfolding drama. The headline of the New York Times article reads, US detecting indications of potential lethal military moves by North Korea. While it seems to be discussing the possibility of a war on the Korean peninsula, in fact, it is painting a picture of the coming conflict for readers. The report cites disclosures from US officials suggesting that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un openly harbors hostilities towards South Korea. He may also launch a deadly strike during South Korea's April parliamentary election or the November US presidential elections. All of this is happening while they aim to prevent a sudden escalation of the situation. US officials interviewed by the New York Times revealed that despite these concerns, US intelligence agencies have yet to uncover clear signs of North Korea preparing for large-scale warfare. This statement is necessary as it raises the question that if the US is closely monitoring Kim Jong-un's every move, how could he still carry out a deadly strike? Furthermore, if such a strike results in casualties, the responsibility would fall squarely on US intelligence agencies. This kind of public narrative preparation is essentially setting the stage for a larger geopolitical game. If a deadly strike from North Korea were to occur, it would be reminiscent of the Pearl Harbor incident, and the US and South Korea would be compelled to retaliate without reservation. Additionally, any retaliation by the US without prior knowledge of the attack would be more justifiable. This is the essence of international diplomacy and intelligence games. At the same time, in the recent press conference at the UN, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused the US, Japan, and South Korea of preparing for a war on the Korean peninsula. He criticized the frequent large-scale military exercises conducted by these nations, describing South Korea and Japan's rhetorical towards Pyongyang as aggressively confrontational. Lavrov's statement appears to be aimed at shaping public perception, suggesting that if a conflict were to erupt, it will be instigated by the US, Japan, and South Korea. This strategy seems designed to exert public opinion pressure to dissuade American support for a full-scale war against North Korea, while simultaneously attempting to place the United States in a reactive position on the international stage. Through prominent media outlets like the New York Times, the US is crafting a narrative to support its position, emphasizing that North Korea is preparing a potentially devastating strike. However, it simultaneously seeks to reassure the public, claiming that this will not escalate into a full-scale military conflict. The aim appears to be to sway both domestic and international opinion in favor of the US interpretation and stance. Both sides are engaged in a battle of narratives, each positioning themselves so that, in the event of a conflict, the other party will be blamed. The US approach, however, seems to be more comprehensive in laying the groundwork for its narrative. The New York Times is informing the public that the US government anticipates the possibility of a war breaking out on the Korean Peninsula, but it is unlikely to evolve into a full-scale conflict like that of the 1950s. This strategic framing seems to be a signal to isolationists in Congress, implying that a wartime presidency is not expected in an election year. The report also mentions that North Korea, along with China, Russia, and Iran, is calling out American isolationism. The US military's 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan is portrayed by North Korea as a sign of America's global retreat, a narrative potentially damaging to President Biden amidst various challenges, including Ukraine, Hamas, and the Houthis. Especially in an election year, the US military suggests that North Korean military officials favor a surprise attack to cause mental disarray and imbalance in the US. Meanwhile, former President Trump has stated that if re-elected, he would withdraw US troops globally and exit NATO. As the election is getting closer, the New York Times continues, these four countries, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are likely to exploit American isolationist sentiments more aggressively, using cyber attacks, misinformation, and even direct military provocations to exacerbate internal divisions and instability in the US. This strategy could lead to attacks on US military bases and further domestic turmoil. The New York Times coverage appears to be an early revelation of potential isolationist strategies and movements, setting the stage for possible future international conflicts and political shifts. The US narrative also touches on the growing closeness between Kim Jong-un and Putin. US officials suggest that while China aids North Korea in evading sanctions, it does not desire a conflict on the Korean Peninsula. This nuance in the US narrative cleverly differentiates China from North Korea without overtly aligning China with North Korea. The narrative implies that if war does break out in Korea, China must maintain a neutral stance and not repeat its historical role in the Korean War of actively supporting North Korea. This time, should China intervene militarily, the development of events could dramatically shift, potentially leading the US to confront China directly, unlike during the Korean War. This article also highlighted the close relationship between Kim Jong-un and Putin, and China's limited influence over North Korea. This serves as groundwork for a possible scenario where if North Korea instigates conflict, the US Congress might question the White House's inaction in leveraging China to prevent such an outcome. The White House could then reference the narrative of limited Chinese influence over North Korea as a preemptive defense. The portrayal of an increasingly close relationship between North Korea and Russian President Vladimir Putin is a key element of this narrative. By positioning Putin as an adversary of the United States, it implies that the US cannot leverage Putin to influence or dissuade Kim Jong-un, North Korea leader. This plot arrangement is both plausible and dramatically charged. The current scenario suggests that the United States is not attempting to use China or Putin to persuade North Korea to stand down, seemingly leaving North Korea to act on its own accord. This framing intensifies the dramatic tension of the situation. Meanwhile, the US Department of State January 19th statement maintains that the US seeks dialogue with North Korea unconditionally and without hostile intentions, underscoring the notion that even if North Korea is perceived as an adversary, the US has always treated them as a friend. If North Korea takes aggressive action, they could be seen as a deliberate act by North Korea themselves. The unfolding situation on the Korean Peninsula has been widely disseminated by the New York Times, with numerous independent media outlets republishing and interpreting the story. Individuals are drawing their own conclusion based on their understanding of the events. These interpretations are collectively shaping a preconceived public opinion narrative that North Korea might have lethal action against South Korea, and if such an event does occur, it would be a scenario orchestrated solely by North Korea with no involvement from the United States. Major development unfolding: Chinese authorities visit to North Korea. At this critical juncture, the Chinese government made a surprising move. The Korean Central News Agency revealed on January 25th that China's Deputy Foreign Minister Sun Weidong secretly visited North Korea. This visit wasn't a mere diplomatic courtesy, it represented a carefully orchestrated adjustment in international affairs, hinting at further progression of plot points about to unfold. Recalling the event in February 2022, when Putin visited Beijing, the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis followed swiftly. Subsequent visits by high-ranking Chinese officials to Moscow or President Xi Jinping's personal trips abroad seems to have been precursors of upcoming international crises. Deputy Foreign Minister Sun Weidong's visit is perceived as a calculated effort to fine-tune strategies. It's about aligning foreign policies and showcasing international strength without backfiring. Take Hamas as a counterexample. They were ultimately defeated by Israel. Xi Jinping surely does not want North Korea to follow these footsteps. The current focus is on maintaining synchronized efforts and exerting pressures on the United States. Additionally, with South Korea openly discussing plans to decapitate Kim Jong-un, China would not stand idly by. Utilizing secret channels in the United States, they've gathered intelligence. Sun Weidong's visit also included discussions on enhancing North Korea's communication channels and upgrading strategies against the US, Japan, and South Korea, ensuring North Korea's stable footing in this international power game. From the New York Times coverage to the conversations of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and now Sun Weidong's visit to North Korea, all signs are pointing to an impending major event on the Korean Peninsula. The 3 aircraft carriers. As tensions rise on the Korean Peninsula, the United States has dispatched 3 aircraft carrier strike groups to the Western Pacific, staging an impressive show of naval fight. Carrier Strike Group 1 with the USS Ronald Reagan, based in Yokosuka, Japan, is positioned to monitor the Sea of Japan and the Korean Peninsula. Following close behind is Carrier Strike Group 2 with the USS Carl Vinson from San Diego, California. Having arrived in the Western Pacific at the end of last year, it has been safeguarding the area around Taiwan, particularly during the recent elections. On January 17th, it participated in a striking tri-nation naval exercise with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force and the South Korean Navy. Carrier Strike Group 3 is assigned with the USS Theodore Roosevelt, also departing from San Diego, is currently patrolling the Pacific Second Island chain. The deployment of these 3 carrier strike groups between the first and second island chains in the Western Pacific is setting the stage for a dramatic display of power. Meanwhile, the presence of the American-class amphibious assault ship USS America and the hospital ship USNS Mercy in the Philippine Sea showcases the U.S. commitment and capability in maintaining regional stability and addressing security challenges. In a significant development, U.S. Ambassador to Japan Rahm Emanuel announced from the Yokosuka Naval Base that the U.S. and Japan are discussing the permission of Japanese shipyards to repair U.S. Navy vessels. This is so that, in the event of a conflict, the up to 70 U.S. ships and submarines stationed in Japan might not need to return to their home ports for maintenance, greatly enhancing the U.S. military response speed and flexibility in the Far East. From a global strategic perspective, the Western Pacific, the Atlantic Ocean, and Middle East are 3 key geographical stages. Whoever maintains continuous control over these regions will likely have an advantage in global conflicts. In the Middle East, the US plays a behind-the-scene command and support role, with Israel actively involved in ground conflicts. In Europe, countries like Germany, Ukraine, Poland, and UK and France are taking the lead, while US military forces are expected to concentrate in the Western Pacific. The China-Russia alliance represents a strategic advantage as they appear to connect the Eurasian continent, which is a clever geopolitical move. However, the stability of this bridge across Siberia remains a suspenseful plot point. Not to be overlooked, the US also has its strategies and influence in vast Siberia. As the China-Russia alliance flaunts its geopolitical strengths, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has taken an unusually tough stance in the South China Sea. Armed with Xi Jinping's diplomatic theories, rejecting international and maritime law constraints, they insist on historical claims to territorial rights. China asserts that any island historically discovered, named, developed, and managed by China, regardless of geographic locations, are part of its territory. This stance has escalated a verbal confrontation with Vietnam. The Vietnamese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has firmly declared sovereignty over the Hong Sa and Trung Sha Islands, directly opposing China's assertive claims. China's repeated insistence on its ownership of these islands further fuel this dispute, setting the stage for what could be a broader conflict. Vietnam's statements are seen as a direct challenge to China. Vietnam, a formidable adversary proven during the Sino-Vietnamese War, is geopolitically and culturally intertwined with China's Guangxi region, adding layers of complexity and potential vitality to the situation. With China facing pressures from Philippines and now Vietnam's assertiveness in the South China Sea, internal control within Vietnam might be a tactic, but amid anti-communist sentiments, it won't be easy.